Hello. Welcome to A Conversation With. As usual, we have David here, which I'll bring in a minute, but not before I talk about our guest very briefly. So today we have on the stream someone I have had the pleasure of working with while I was at Eidos Montreal. I spent a stint of time on Guardians of the Galaxy, the game, which Mary DeMarle, she was the executive narrative director. Well, she's an executive narrative director. Sorry, I can't say that quickly. Executive narrative director at Eidos Montreal, and so she ends up naturally on a lot of the bigger projects like this one. It was I really had fond memories of being there. It was a lot of fun. The narrative, as if anyone who's played the game or have read the reviews, you already know that it's got a very quirky personality and it's resonating really well with the people that are playing it. I have to say it's funny because I was really intimidated when I met Mary, because she actually had a chance to work on a brand that is one of the first video game licenses that I ever played. It was well down the road by the time I think she worked on it as far as sequels is concerned, but she was actually working on Myst. I don't know if anyone's ever played a Myst game, but these are like legendary games from back in the day because of their visualizations, and they're very, very story driven. So yeah, when I found out that she had worked on a bunch of those, I was just like, wow. Quite the legend. She's very, very awesome. I'm glad that she could make it to this particular chat. Let's bring in David and we'll get the party started. David.
Let's get this party started.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm definitely sharing everything that you've mentioned, for having the chance to work with Mary myself. Yeah, we're trying to bring a lot of different expertise, a lot of different personas to this show. So this one will be very interesting to have the perspective more from the narrative side, creating characters, stories, and all that. So yeah, that'll be a fun one for sure.
Yeah, I think it's important that, because I mean, if you're working as an animator on a game, and you happen to be working for, say, the narrative department or the cutscene, or like the department that's handling the cutscene animations, this is a perfect example of the type of person you would actually end up working with. Someone who's worried about the actual dialogue, someone who's worried about the overall arcing story, who has a team of writers that are breaking things down. Essentially, it's like the foundation of what an animator would then come in and then try to actually realize. So it's nice to get a little bit of fresh perspective on what it's like to live on that other side of the coin, right? So let's bring her in and she can tell us all about that. Hello, Mary. Welcome to the conversation.
Hi, thanks. It's really fun to be here.
Mary, I'm tempted to start with, so for anyone in the audience right now that is not familiar with what a narrative director is doing, especially in video game. So let's just start by, setting the stage of what is your work, what is your responsibility on a game such as Guardian of the Galaxy?
Okay, the way I look at being a narrative director, I guess sometimes I like to equate it to being a showrunner on TV, kind of. I work with the creative core of the team. Usually the creative core consists of the game director, who is game director / creative director. And then, of course, there's like the gameplay directors, the art directors, the animation directors. I work with all these people to define in the beginning, what is the game experience? What is the player fantasy? What is this game that we're making going to be? And then my job specifically becomes, okay, work more closely with the game director to craft a story, to basically come up with what is the story? What are the characters? I lead a team of writers who then start helping me to flesh out the story, help flesh out those characters. And then I'm constantly like running between making sure that the story we're creating is working with the gameplay, is being told through the gameplay. That's the connection I have with the gameplay director. Working with the artists to kind of say, you know, well, here's the story, here's the character, how can you in the concept art, how can you express these characters, how can you express these environments, support all these themes. Working with the cinematics director when the scripts are done to basically say, you know, here's the script, let's talk about it, let's talk about the emotions, the feeling, how you guys going to start realizing it. Being present during a lot of the recording sessions to ensure that the actors, you know, that the actors understand. The director is going to do a lot of that, but I'm there to answer the big overarching questions, and also to help, because sometimes when you write a script, when an actor has to say it, they can't say the line, and then I have to be there to kind of fix that. So it kind of encompasses all aspects of story and the implementation of story in the game.
So it's really boring. You don't have a lot of things to do, is what you're saying.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Okay. Okay. That's what I got out of that. It sounded like it was really not a lot. Good. Good.
That's awesome. I mean, for having seen you on a production floor, going from meetings to meeting to department, and with your team and all that, that it's very interesting, because there's the director aspect of it, which means that you represent, you know, your own team, and you are in charge to make sure that with all of the other team, you're kind of on the same page in terms of, okay, here's the game that we're doing. Let's all push in the same direction. And obviously, in game is just a crazy marathon, so everyone is going in their own direction, and you're constantly trying to bring everyone together. And there's also the narrative aspect of telling a story. Do you still have time at all to write or to develop characters, or is it a little bit in the beginning, but then it's just chaos management and making sure that this train is going in the right direction?
It's a lot of chaos management, not in the beginning. I mean, in the beginning, when you're developing the game and you're developing it, I'm often one of the only writers involved. So I am at that point doing a lot of the writing and doing a lot of the setting of the stages. But certainly as I've become more and more dependent on my writing staff, it becomes much more that I'm discussing with them. They are then presenting me with scripts. I'm giving them feedback and on their scripts, and basically reading them and saying, well, this part's not working, or have you considered this, or what about this aspect of the character, and pushing it. And then I do get to write at times if nothing is working out. If like they just aren't getting it, if people just aren't getting what I have in mind, then I might have to take it and I might write it and say, this is what I have in mind. But I don't like doing that. I mean, I do like doing that, but I prefer to do it and then say, this is what I have in mind, now make it good. So you rewrite it and make it better. Okay. So
yeah, this is the bad version. Make the good version of this, please. That'd be great.
Exactly.
It's funny because I feel like, you know, having watched you, because I was there early on in the project, and it really felt like the narrative department on these projects, they start in a very push kind of oriented role. They're pushing a lot of information, and then towards the end, it's a lot of like, oh my god, pulling, because it's like there's at that point, and if anyone's ever shipped a game before, it gets very chaotic, like David and Mary were both sort of indicating, and a lot of things are happening at the same time. It gets kind of ridiculous, the crazy spike that happens at the very end, and like you at the end of the project, when you look at a build one day and then the next day, it's almost like a completely different game. There's so much stuff that's entering this game, especially with these big teams. And so I see, you know, people like, you know, narrative directors are often running around trying to make sure that they catch disconnects and consistency issues, and considering games are much less linear than like a typical film, those inconsistencies could literally be everywhere. And so I can only imagine the kind of firefighting that you would have had to do putting out a game with that much story in it at the end.
Yes. Well, I would say that's the interesting thing about being a writer, not just a narrative director, but being a writer in a game, is that at times you are the one who's leading it. You're writing the dialogues, you're putting them down, you're doing this. But other times there's this moment where it switches, and it switches from, oh my God, I've got to react to what is in front of me on the screen. Like, because when you're building a story, you have the story idea, you have the plot, you have all these characters, you kind of break it out, you create what we create, this blueprint. And once it's a blueprint of the story, then that's when it starts going out to level design teams, gameplay, etc. And they start creating the levels. And at that point, they're throwing their ideas in, and you as a writer now have to react to those ideas, as you were saying. And you have to say like, whoa, 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 okay, now that's not how I saw it. But actually there's something really cool in what you're doing, but I gotta fix it. I gotta make narrative cool.
That's it. Yeah, there's like a balance of like, oh, he leaving an open mind and heart to some great ideas that iterate from that nest egg that you gave them, versus them coming up with maybe a possibly amazing idea that just doesn't fit in logically to the story, or who knows what, right? Like, it's a lot of both, I would imagine.
Yeah, there is a lot of both. Because also the one thing that, and I think this is one of the reasons I love working in games, is it is a collaborative medium, and it is where there are tons of creative people with different skills who are invested in it and who are bringing their skill to the table. Like, I'm not an animator. I can write on the page, oh, he does a triple jump axel, whatever. Okay, but it's like, well, wait a minute. The animator's got to say, that's not really physically possible. So can we change that? Can we do stuff? So, and then having all those people bringing their own ideas and creativity to the table, it's definitely, I think it makes it better, but it's also a challenge, because you are always dealing with the people who are like, I like this idea, why doesn't it work? And it's like, well, it's a great idea, but it doesn't work because X, Y, and Z happened before it, and all this stuff is going to happen after, and it'll be weird.
A lot of educating.
Yes.
To make sure that they understand the reasons why the ideas may not fit, or why some might. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So, Mary, one of the collaboration that we did together when you were narrative director and I was cinematic director on Deus Ex was those, especially on the shoot when there's some collaboration going on. And on other project, I feel like I've seen two sides of the spectrum. On the one side, we had a script that we were told, but it's kind of along the lines of, and do something cool. And there's other script that literally, if the actor was changing one word, it was a no-go. No, it needs to be exactly the. Where do you personally lie on this spectrum in terms of, here's what the narrative team is bringing, but then you're have ideas being pushed back either by the cinematic department, or it could be by the actors directly, or it could be by the storyboard artist that just has this happy accident and there's this cool idea. What is your mindset about this collaboration usually?
My mindset is generally to be open to all that collaboration. I was very lucky with my first game experience. It was writing for Myst 3 Exile, and the actor who played the villain in it was Brad Dourif. People might know him as Grima Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings, or the Doctor in Deadwood, etc. And I was really super lucky to work with him because he's Chucky too. So because he's a writer's actor, he insisted on like meeting me ahead of time and saying, I want to understand what your intent is in these scenes, and I want to make sure that I'm bringing it to it. And then he would also open up, like, he'd be like, well, from the actor's perspective, that's not working. I can't feel it. I can't do that. And so I very quickly learned to trust the actors, and because I'm not an actress, I'm not an actor. So I quickly learned to trust that and to see how their talent brings it to a higher level. And the same goes with the cinematics, the storyboard artists, the cinematic team, etc. They have a visual sense that I don't necessarily have. I tend to be a visual writer, but I trust their experience more. So when they're suggesting things, my job basically becomes, I need to listen to what they're saying. I need to understand why they want to do it. And I need to make sure that they understand the heart and the intention of where we're going. And that's why I like being on set with the actors too, because I like to, it's like, we write things on the page, we hear it in our heads as writers, and it sounds super easy. And then you're listening to them and they're struggling to get that word out. And there have been times when I've had to insist that they keep a specific word, because I knew that in other scenes there were other things that were being set up.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it's like, if they're saying the heart of what I need to be said and they're not using my words, that's fine, as long as the intention is there.
Yeah, that continuity thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say that for Guardians of the Galaxy, that has like 5 hours of cutscene and an insane amount of, banter and narrative element within the game. That's a lot of information you have to keep in your head when you're going on a shoot with actors, to make sure that the change is not going to contradict any of those other elements, because at some point it becomes a domino effect, and and you can break a lot of things. So it's pretty impressive. Just wanted to say.
It's the kind of thing I like to do, though. I mean, I like to keep I tend to have a very deep logical sense for story as well, and I like to keep that. I've failed at times. You're right, and then you're just like, oh, okay, well, how do we fix that later? Or
call
maybe
it
nobody will
ADR.
notice that one. Yeah, there's ADR. Maybe nobody will notice that. So.
There's a clicking sound, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. Do you guys hear it?
Yeah, I hear it too. It just started a minute ago.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds like a.
Hear it, but
you don't hear it, huh?
No.
I think it's Mary's cat that is starting to.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought. I thought maybe it was sitting on the microphone and is like giving us a little bit of a show, but
no, he's far away. But I have had other people. It probably is to do with my mic, because I've been in Zoom meetings, and they've told me, "Is your cat purring, Mary?"
Okay, well, yeah, we're gonna run with it. I didn't know if I was going crazy. I thought I was having a stroke or something. So, continuity in a game with that much content, like David's suggesting, is got to be like trying to find a needle in the haystack sometimes, though, because you end up with, like, what people don't necessarily always remember is that cutscenes are not the only narrative device in a game. There are a lot of scripted events. There are other forms depending on the type of game we're dealing with. And so, then there's different teams that are working on this. So, like, I mean, what's your strategy on making sure, like, because a game that big is not, you can't possibly sit down every day and play the whole game, right?
No, not at all.
So how do you attack that?
Well, I'm going to add, before saying how I attack it, I have to add the other complication on it for writing, which is that often you have to write the entire thing out of order. You're not writing, like, as a screenwriter, you can sit there and write a script from start to finish, and then you can perfect it, and then they shoot it. But for us, when working on a game, every department has different requirements. They have a different schedule, so to speak. So, like in the case of Guardians, to get all the cutscenes done in shippable time, we had to actually write most of the cutscenes before we wrote most of the missions, or we were doing it simultaneously. We were so you're actually writing scenes that you don't know what came before it, and you're hoping that it'll work.
Sounds easy.
And some of
you're doing a lot of this.
You are. You're really doing a lot of this, and you're often arguing with production, because production tends to look in terms of schedules and saying, well, it's the bulk of the team has to work on chapter 4 first, because that's the challenge for the team. And it's like, yeah, but we haven't gotten to chapter 4. We don't know what happened in chapter 1 yet. So how can we do that? So sometimes there's a fight within production to convince them, how can we manage this? How can we break it into doing certain things in order, and yet still front loading. So that's one of the big challenges. But the reality is, you can't depend on it being from beginning to end. But you can mitigate it as much as you can by looking at it and front loading. And like, for example, I said we did cinematic scenes before we often did a lot of the in-game banters. But we kind of knew where we were going with these, and we got those tent poles in. And we were able to do that. And then it's a matter of constantly checking scripts, rereading, rewriting. We went through many, many iterations. And I'm not the only one who's the watchdog of this. I have the other people who are playing the game all the time, one of whom is the game director. The game director is playing it all the time. And I've been very lucky to work with Jean-François Degas as my creative director for a long time. And he's story oriented. So he's kind of catching things and stuff as well. So
you share the responsibility a little bit as far as the big overarching vision. So you have more than one set of eyes basically on the game at any given time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where do you even start? So let's say, okay, it's been announced you guys are working on a Marvel game and there's a blank page. Where do you even begin in terms of what inspiration to start with the story, and what is the creative process just to get an idea of, okay, let's go in this direction, and then the story evolves for a couple of years?
Well, anytime we start working on a game, if it's no matter what it is, we want to start by doing research, by understanding the essence. So for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, it's like, okay, we have to make a Guardians of the Galaxy game. So what do we do first? And the first thing we do in terms of, we're having dialogues with Marvel Game Studios to say, where is our room to play? Are we supposed to be this? And they were great to say, we want you to make your own original take on the Guardians. So once we have that, it's like, all right, well then we've got to immerse ourselves in everything Guardians. We watch all the movies again. We watch some of the animated films. We read countless comic books that feature the characters and all that stuff. And as we start doing that, then we start saying, okay, what is the essence of this franchise? What are the essence of this? And for us, that's how we very quickly came up with the idea that, well, what's really cool about this is the Guardians themselves, how they're all really unique characters, and how cool it would be to hang out with them. And when we come upon that decision, then we come upon the decision, well, then we can only play Peter Quill. We have to play Peter. We can't play them all because the fun is hanging out with them and seeing how, having to react to the crazy, quirky things that they do, and to try and lead them. So we kind of start from there. We start brainstorming locations, settings, stuff like that. And then as all of this is coming, I start realizing and we also pick a theme that we want to work with. And once those things start falling together, it's like, I almost describe it as like, I'm pulling all the ingredients into the pot, and then I'm seeing and stirring it, and then I'm pulling out of the pot the story that starts forming in my head. So it kind of goes from there.
Do you feel it's one of the, if not the funnest part of the process?
It is, yes. Well, it's hard to say the funnest because number one, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It is terrifying because you're like, I'm not sure what I want to do here. And then when you're building a story, you're like, you get excited by ideas, but then you're like, but they don't make any sense. And then you get terrified because how do I make all this fit together and all that stuff? But it is exciting because you have ideas and you have things. It's just like the world. It's like there's so much you're not into the constraint 100% yet. As things start forming, you get into the constraints. But I would say at the same time, it's not the only time that it's the best fun, because there'd be times when, like, especially on Guardians, I'd assign a scene to a writer. And basically we talked about the scene ahead of time saying, this needs to be a scene between these two characters and the emotional context is this. And we need to learn this information. So go run with it. And then when they give me the script and I'm like, oh my God, this is great. They got it. They understood it. And there's so much joy. Or there might be a moment where you're like, oh, they didn't quite get it. And now I got to figure out how to fix that and then communicate. But when you see it and when you get it, then it's a lot of fun.
On this stream, we talk a lot about how animators are in a similar position where we put a lot of our self into the work that we do. And so I think it must be equally terrifying to you when you put out, because a lot of these ideas are yours, right? You're putting them out there, and you're, like, you feel like people are going to be having an opinion on that, and it must make you feel vulnerable. And I'm sure even after the many years of doing this, it probably still feels a little bit like that. Just like animators, it never really quite goes away. They just have to learn how to embrace it somehow. I found one thing that I noticed, that I've never been on a team that does this, and I always, one of my fondest memories of that project were the table reads on Friday nights. Yeah. So in my mind, that was like your safe bubble that you could allow your team and yourself to prototype and get a feel for these scripts. So this is before doing table reads with actors, which is something that is also something that you would do. But I've never seen it done like this, where like you do the first round, almost like a litmus test, like a tone test of some of these dialogue based scenes. And what would happen is we would show up like in a boardroom with snacks, always had to be snacks. And we would sit around and take turns playing the different roles and just read through the scripts and just see how it feels, And I remember like, and then everyone had an opinion. Everyone would be like, yeah, it feels a little awkward, but this, and then you were taking all this stuff in, you had your own opinions. That must be, is that always the way you've done it? Or is that something you've learned to do over the years?
I didn't do it on any project before.
Oh, interesting.
One, but I formed the idea because of my experience on other projects.
Okay.
One of the things I realized is that for writing, when you're writing dialogues, the best thing you can do is to hear someone else read your work.
Totally.
Because when you write it, you always hear it delivered the way you expect it delivered, and you hear and it flows perfectly.
Totally.
And so I always knew that the best way to do this was to read the scripts out loud. And so on this project, I admit you were talking about the anxiety and it's like, I got to share this, and I feel vulnerable. I was nervous with the group to say, let's start doing this, because I knew that vulnerability myself, and I knew they were probably feeling it, and I didn't want to force something. But we started doing it, and it helped. You mentioned snacks. Well, it was beer time, so that kind of helped with the insecurities.
Yes, liquid bravery.
But we started doing it, and gradually we perfected it. I mean, because first it was just like, let's just get together and read scripts. We perfected the process over time, in which it became more than just let's read the scripts. It became okay, let's read the scripts. And then when people are reading them, people after it's read will volunteer to give the writer feedback later. Yep. Okay. Because when you're in the room reading the scripts, you're getting an initial feel, you're getting a reaction, you're getting this, but it's really more valuable as well to then have that feedback given to you later on individually. And one of the other things that it succeeded in doing was building a camaraderie between the writers.
Yes.
So everybody became very supportive of each other.
But not just writers. I thought that was part of the secret sauce. You invited some other people from other peripheral departments into that meeting. And I think that was pure genius, because now you're also building rapport and a camaraderie even on the people who would eventually need to make these things a reality and put them into the game, right?
Yes, we did it. We opened it to anyone who wanted to join us.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people always did, but we opened it up to anyone on the team who wanted to join us. And getting that insight from other people was very valuable. And then later on, as we were doing it, and by then we were starting to do the actual recording. So if the actors happened to be in the studio on a Friday, we invited them. So then we'd get them to, and they'd be like, they were most of the time they were super excited to do it. They're like, oh, hey, we get to read a first draft of something. This is gonna be fun. And then we'd get to hear them perform a first draft of a script that's not even ready per se. But it helped because it helped solidify the voices of the characters.
Totally.
As we came to love it. So
yeah.
So is that a process
it was definitely a good process, and it's definitely one that I'm going to emulate from now on.
Nice.
On every project I'm on.
Yeah.
This was an ensemble cast, so I'd imagine it would be even more important, right? Because there were so many different voices in this game, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
and that was one of the rules, because the rule was you could not read your own script. So then other people in the room had to volunteer to be the different voices. And that became part of the fun too, because a bunch of the people were not actors, So one of my fondest memories was, and then the writers, as we went on, became really cool, because they'd be like, the guys would volunteer for for the female roles, you know, and but you know, and then that was kind of fun. And sometimes you'd get like told you had to be the role, and you just kind of did it, you know,
Just roll with it. Yeah.
And you did it. And one of my favorite memories was of our narrative coordinator. I don't know when it first happened, but he got assigned the role of Mantis. And he can not act at all, but he embraced that role and he performed it.
I love it.
And from then on in, he was always performing Mantis for us, even in front of the actors themselves. And it was, the actors, bless their heart. I mean, Mantis wasn't one of the actors; it was the core 5 Guardians. But so he played that, and bless their heart, they just were like, they embraced him doing it, and was like,
I love it.
Cool. Yeah.
You can now find him on Broadway in various theatrical productions. He left the game industry.
Yes.
Amazing.
So did you find yourself, the team adjusting a lot of the dialogue? Is there any instance that there was a sequence that you're like, oh yeah, that's gold, and then a table reader like, ooh, yeah, that we need to rework that, because that's something that I experience on other game, and often just on the logic of what is said when, and when you have people expressing it, like, this is not clear at all for someone that just hearing this for this first time. Is that part of the elements that were kind of adjusted along the way?
Yeah, I mean, the adjustments would come, like I said, we would just read it out loud. The writer would be taking their own notes. Then other writers would volunteer to say, hey, send me that script and I'll give you written feedback on it. And then, of course, I am always giving written feedback on scripts. But what ended up happening would be like, they would go through a round of the writers themselves before it would come to me. And what they told me happened a lot was it helped improve the quality of the jokes. Because one person, you know, you'd have a joke on there and people would be like, okay. And then, but someone else would say, hey, try this, you know, and then someone else would riff off that and go, no, this. And then in the end, I think what was pretty amazing about it is sometimes the writers themselves no longer knew where the joke came from. They didn't know whose script was who. And I know that at one point, like one of our other coordinator was present during one of the sessions with the actors. I couldn't be in attendance. And it was, I think it's Lady Hellbender in the game, and she's saying something very about Adam Warlock, and oh, isn't he a beautiful piece of candy, kind of thing. and so the coordinator writes to us, says, who wrote that line? Because oh my God, she performed it so incredibly well. And the writers were like, I don't know, it wasn't my script. And it was like, and I was sitting there going, well, it had to be either Craig or Ethan, because both of you had your hands on that script at one point. And then ultimately someone else checked through our files and said, oh, it was him. And he was like, well, I don't remember.
That's so funny.
Well, that's a pretty good team chemistry there. If,
yes.
You know, it's just open creativity and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day who landed the best joke or whatnot. So that's
yes.
That's great.
Yeah. And that's why I would do the script reads again, because I think the script reads built that chemistry.
Yeah. And some funny ideas. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and you want to have the best of both. Well, the very well thought out, structured, organized way that a writer is going to, but still benefit from the more improvised. That is often either happening on the shoot or even better in the table read, because then you can already catch it and be more efficient on the shoot afterwards.
Yes. Yeah. And some things did, like when we were talking before about the actors changing it, they actually contributed some of the good jokes too when we were on stage. We had a good scene. We had, there was one I think particularly I remember is the scene where the Guardians are confronting, well, Lady Hellbender is about to sick her monster on them. And I can't remember what the original line in the script, but she says something like, do you know what I did to the last people who tried to defy me? And we had a line in the script from Star-Lord. I don't know what it was, but then I think it was either John, who played Star-Lord, or Alex, who played Rocket. I know Alex came up to me, and I don't know who said the line, but they said, well, what if he says, you let him go? And that wasn't the line we had in the script, but when they said it, it was like, this is just perfect. You have to have Star-Lord say to this lady, you let him go? And that was cool. So we'd have that happen on the floor as well.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
Brent,
I think that.
yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, I think Mary just covered it though. I think when you do this, this idea where you put it out there and let other people just riff on it, that's where some of the best gags, some of the best sort of perfect in the moment sort of inspirations will come from. Because it's difficult, like I would imagine for a writer, like you're obviously in the business of putting together things that are funny. Sometimes that would have been one of the most difficult things about writing, I think, for this game, because we all know that comedy is probably one of the hardest things to write for, because unlike a drama or some sort of typical sort of narrative game, if you try to be funny and you're not, it really falls flat and it can really turn people off. So there was a lot of, I'm sure, bravery there, and I guess trying to capture that lightning in the bottle when it could present itself by just having moments. And I think that's part of that makes a lot of sense too, because having key interfaces in time where that can happen could control some of the chaos and noise that it could also generate when you actually open it up for people to say, hey, you have any ideas? What are your thoughts? Because if that was happening literally all the time, it would be impossible to get anything done. Right.
So I mean, at some point you have to step in and guide it. And even at that, you can go too far. I mean, one-upping on the jokes, and then the whole team falls in love with the joke. But then I look at it, I'm like, guys,
right? Yeah.
I can't. We gotta pull it down. It's like if I don't pull it down, then JF is gonna pull it down, or then Marvel will pull it down. But it was amazing how often things got in, and I'm not even talking about jokes, and I'm talking about ideas that got into the game that the writers came up with, and they kept expecting. They told me afterwards, there's we kept expecting this crazy idea getting shot down by you or by JF or by Marvel, and it didn't. And they were like, we're amazed at how many of our crazy ideas did not get shot down and are in the game today, which was fun. And if they have a good idea, it works. It works. So
Speaking of crazy ideas that got somehow made it through to the end of the game, I was surprised to find out that the early tests scene with Lipless actually was in the game. I had no idea, and when I found that out, I was just like, "That is literally hilarious!" That it just stayed. That's so good.
Yes, and to explain for the listeners, that was when you're working on a game, you do it in phases. So one of the first things you create is the first playable, which is a test of the ideas. And I think it was the first playable that we did. And in the first playable, we had written this entire mission that for the Guardians, and it all culminates in this bar scene where they sing with this alien to get out of trouble. But it wasn't a part of the original story at all. It was just how we're testing our pipelines, how we're testing our builds. But the singing thing it was a battle of wits where you sing, and it was battle of wits were a big part of our game. We put them into the game. And so it was such a good moment that even though the whole story that revolved around it was not at all going to be in the game. No. And when we rewrote everything, we found a place to put it in.
That's so funny.
And we had to do a little bit of shooting for that, but for the most part, we kept what you guys had originally done.
That's really funny.
Okay.
Mary, I'm sure this one is super difficult to answer, but what would you attribute the success, especially of the narrative element of this game? Because the game has been well received by the critic. The narrative element is definitely one of the high point of the game. Again, from all the critic. Best narrative at the Game Awards. I mean, it's at the top of what you can expect of what quality narrative in a game can be. And for having tasted a little bit of game production, which is this insanely long marathon for years with hundreds of different challenges, what do you attribute the success of the narrative element of Guardian of the Galaxy?
I guess I would equate it to a couple of things, or give it. Number one is the strength of the writing team itself that I built. And I would say the script reads, enabling those writers to learn from each other, to grow and make their own writing stronger as a result, and the humor. So number one, I think the strength of the writing team, I think a lot of it was our process as well. We knew this was a narratively driven game, and we knew narrative would be one of the most important aspects of it. And the game director supported that and fought for it all along. And you'd often have times in production where people like, can't we get this in? And it's like, but that defeats, it's like, what about this kind of gameplay? What if we did this? And it's like, but that defeats the focus on hanging out with the Guardians. That defeats this. So some of it was that, and the processes we set in place to be able to iterate it and to be able to keep, going through draft after draft after draft, and getting it. Another thing I think is important is a lot of times in games you have writers outside of the project. It can work. It can totally work to hire a freelance writer, have them not on the production floor. I have, in the course of my career, grown to realize that the best way to write for a game is to be implementing the writing in yourself, because then you see it, you learn from it. It's just like you learn from hearing people read your stuff. By putting it into the game and playing it, you learn. And we really did a lot of that. And we got the dialogues into the game as fast as we possibly could. First with horrible text-to-speech, but it's in there, it's playable, you can do it, you can hear it, you can tweak it, etc. So a lot of it was the process. And last but not least, I would say, is just my own personal experience and growth, because I could not have done this game when I started. But in the course of my career, learning to trust the writers, learning to explain myself better, learning to give and take from each other. That's something that I think this project really helped me. I think I was finally ready for that.
Yeah, that leads me to something that we've discussed a couple of times in other streams, is this evolution from being an artist to eventually a lead manager, supervisor, director, and all that. And unfortunately, in the industry, sometimes this evolution is linked with, pay raise as well. Mm-hmm. So you have very good artists that are not good managers at all that end up in those positions because they want the raise and all that. And there's different studios have different solutions for that. But how was it for you personally? Because I'm, assuming that you started as a very talented writer that's slowly been recognized and been given more and more responsibility, to the point that you get to a point that you're becoming more a leader than a writer. So was that a natural evolution for you, or that's something that you had to, or was it intimidating in the beginning? How was this transition for you?
Well, for me, it was a natural evolution in my career. I mean, I've been in this industry a long time. I've been in like 20 years. And when I started, writers were not very valued. It was like anyone can write, programmers are writing the games and stuff like that.
Programmers, they were writing, they were animating, they were doing everything.
Exactly. And some programmers can be very talented writers, but not all of them. And it is a skill. And when I first got involved, I started as a freelancer, and I would do the work, and I would send it into, and then the game would come out and my work had been changed and I didn't understand why. And I'm like, okay, so that pushed me to say, I don't want to be a freelancer. I want to get into it, because I want to be a full-time person. So I want to be on staff. I want to be there so that I can at least defend the ideas and I can, see why these choices are made. And then from that, it ended up being, okay, now I am the lead writer on it. And I'm writing an awful lot, but then I'm also getting pulled, as you said, in all these other directions. And I have support writers who are helping me. And gradually for me, it was a learning experience. And I'm personally happy with the direction it's gone, because for me, what's always been the most important for me is telling the story. And not necessarily through words. I like to write. Sometimes I feel the only way I can express myself is through the writing. But at other times, it's like if I'm able to express that idea and someone else is able to write it and make it, and I can help them make their writing stronger. That's where I am now in a career. And it feels right for me. But I work with some of the writers I work with. They're like, I never want to be a lead because I just want to write. I just want to do the writing. And that is perfectly acceptable as well.
Yeah. So it's a little bit the analogy of becoming the conductor. You start by playing an instrument really well, but it's not that you're so much in love with this instrument. It's just about music in general, and becoming the conductor that's going to, lead all of those other musicians is as fulfilling than
Yes.
anything else.
Yeah. And the frustration that I would feel as a writer is I can't get the words right. Now the frustration becomes, I can't get you to understand what I'm trying
exactly.
to say.
Yeah, I can't explain it or communicate it well.
Or I'm reading what you wrote and I can't understand how it's hitting me in a certain way. And that's the challenge I find now, is like to read somebody's work and say, oh, it's not quite, what is wrong with it? And that can get frustrating to try and figure out. Then you figure out what's wrong with it, and then you got to figure out how to explain it. So that for me is the ongoing challenge these days.
Which is when you write here's the bad version of it.
Exactly.
I got the $1 million question for you. The obvious question that needs to be asked at this point, of course, is why games? Why writing for games? You could write for so many different things. Like you mentioned showrunner for a series. Like you could just as well, find yourself in Dan Harmon's shoes and like running a show and a team of writers on that show. Why games specifically?
Because for me, I believe games are one of the most challenging forms of storytelling. Because like right when I started in the industry, the first thing is like I was in a room and I'm saying, oh, in the story, in the player, the character does this, and then my boss at the time says, yeah, but what if the player doesn't do that? And I was like, he has to do it. It's essential to the story. And he's like, yeah, but what if he doesn't? And then my mind just kind of exploded, because it was like, wow, okay, now I got to go to a deeper level, and I've got to figure out how to urge them into the directions I want, and how to handle what they do and write. So it becomes like layer on layer on layer. And to me, that was super, super challenging. And I loved it. And then the more that I've done it, I've also realized the power of games as a storytelling medium. They have a different power than films, because they're active. So like as a film can touch you. A film can really, I cry all the time at really good movies. I laugh like crazy. I come home smiling like crazy, but I'm watching an experience. I'm passive. Whereas in a game, I am the one who's doing the actions, and I'm being presented with the challenge. And I have to figure out how to solve that challenge. And I take an action, and then I see the results of that action. And when you wrap that challenge in something meaningful, like an exploration of grief, it allows you to feel in a different way than you could watching a movie. In a movie, you can sympathize, you can empathize. In a game, you can experiment, you can discover, and you can find out for yourself what you believe and what you feel. And stories have the power in games to do that.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because you're making choices basically. As where in a film you're not. Like, it's funny you use the word sympathy and empathy, which you for sure can still experience as a passive audience member. But what's the next? I always think of sympathy as layer 1, empathy as layer 2, as far as the connectivity you have to the narrative in the characters that are being portrayed. But like, what's the next layer above empathy? I think the only thing that can do that is games, is because now you're like vicariously experiencing those situations. Empathy is, I've been in that situation before. Sympathy is, I have never been in that situation before, but I can imagine maybe what it would be like. But when in a game, there's no, it's like you are actually in that situation along with this character. Yeah. Never thought of it that way.
And games are, they're play. And why do we play? We play to experiment. We play to learn. And so when you can play an experiment and be like, for example, I can take on the persona of someone else. Like I can watch Breaking Bad and I can see Walter White and I could be like, wow. And I can get really deep into that. But he's out there, okay? But now I can get into a game. I can become Walter White. I can see the repercussions of my actions, and I can decide for myself, whoa, that's too much. I think the first time that when I was working on Deus Ex Human Revolution, we have the takedowns. Adam Jensen can take characters down, and you can do it lethally or non-lethally. The whole time I played, I was playing non-lethal all the time. And then one day I was like, you know what? I really, really should try a lethal takedown because I should really see what this is. And I'm playing it and I do the lethal takedown and I was like, oh my God. And I threw the controller away because of the animation, because of what I saw. And I was like, I'm never doing that again. And the game allowed me to know that, to discover I'm never going to do that again. And I didn't have bad repercussions because I didn't do it in real life, you know? So there's that sense that the power of a game can teach you something.
I guess that could have went in a different direction. That would have been a bit scarier and darker and more sinister. It's like, yes, I think I kind of like this. You never know. You never know. I guess you don't know until you know.
Yeah.
And do you feel this newfound passion for this challenge of of kind of almost manipulating a little bit the player in a direction that, let's call it like the main path, or you know, because all the last few games that you worked on are very choice driven, and I know that at some point I asked you, Mary, how do you deal with a story that starts here and finish there, but with so many, and how did you? So is that something that you're like, ooh, that's a cool challenge, and I'm going to push it to the next level with the level of complexity? that was
I like the challenge. Yeah, I like the challenge. Certainly on like. One of the things I loved on, because you have to control the choice. I mean, you want to give choices, and choices result in take stories in certain directions, but you have to control it because you've got a production budget. And you can't just do this. And not only that, you have to make sure everything makes narrative logical sense. So one of the things I loved on, like when I was writing for Human Revolution, is to put in those choices in a conversation and say, okay, so now as a player, I can say this or this. And it's like, how do I make those distinctly different, but eventually bring the conversation back to the same end point so that the story can go on? And the experience that the player has, player A and player B, can be different, but they still have the same kind of experience. Their interpretation or the way they get there is different, but they get there none all the same. So that's the challenge that I really, really enjoy doing. I love doing it in the writing, although it can get frustrating because you'll be like, this branch choice, it doesn't go anywhere. There's nothing you could say after that. So how do I fix that? You know, and then taking it on the bigger level of the story structure itself is a big challenge.
Yeah. Is that something that the team would visually map out in terms of all the different branch and it comes back here? Or what is the way to keep control of all of this?
I'm trying to remember all the things we've done. When I would write just a dialogue, believe it or not, I just did it in Word, and then I would just keep it in my head. I didn't have flowcharts, but flowcharts would be made afterward to help everybody else understand it.
Yeah, I saw some of them.
Yeah, and flowcharts certainly were vital when you're on the set for the actors to understand, like, okay, where is this all going? But from the overall story, it's funny because I'm like sitting there and I know these flowcharts exist, but I think a lot of them were done after production when we had to test. So they weren't actually done during the course of production. So when I think about it, part of me is like, yeah, sometimes you really are like, it's a miracle we did everything we did.
What would you say among all the challenges that you guys had on Guardian of the Galaxy? Which is there one that stands out? Maybe even at a point that during production, like, oh my God, how are we going to handle this part of the production?
I don't know if any one stands out. Certainly, like I said, the challenge of maintaining the coherency in the story when we're writing it out of order. Like I remember at one point, because one of the things that happens in the course of the game is the relationship between Drax and Gamora changes over the course. So, in the beginning, he's like really, on about her being, the harlot spawn of Thanos and a murderess and all this stuff. And in the end, he's the first one to basically say, we accept you, Gamora. And so we knew that this would happen, but we're writing chapters out of order. And I had, as I'm reviewing them, I'm kind of like, okay, wait, what chapter are we in? okay, we're in chapter 6. He shouldn't be calling her that anymore. We have to make sure that he's calling her, woman, and we have to, but we're not sure. I mean, I remember feeling like, oh my God, I know that by the time we get to 10,
right.
he's saying this, but I'm hoping
Exactly.
that it's working. And a lot of that was hope, but we we didn't know exactly, we didn't plan it out exactly, but we had that master vision or so. So that was definitely a challenge. Another challenge was just getting the production schedules, to meet and to do it and get everybody on board. And another big challenge, not necessarily narrative related, but a challenge in any game, is keeping people focused on the outcome, and like when you start a game, it's in your head, you see it, but not everybody else can see it. And as people are starting to work on it, production goes through times where people don't believe. They're like, this isn't working, this won't work. And you have to kind of rally people to say, it will. You have to trust it. You have to trust the process. You have to go. That's a big challenge too.
Yeah.
On sets for film and television, they have people that are called continuity experts. They're usually an extension of the writing team. Typically, they're experts of the script, and it's a very, very, very difficult job, even in a very linear sort of experience. But so when you introduce things like branching dialogue, that particular problem, it just becomes exponentially more difficult to solve. So trusting the process is for sure. You might as well just it require quite a bit of faith, I think, in the moment, to not paralyze people from not being able to move forward when there's all these things that you're trying to keep track of all at the same time when you're doing a shoot. We're coming up on the half an hour left mark, but I did want to get into one other little topic that I think is particularly interesting and really novel, I think, and very unique in many ways, that was introduced in Guardians of the Galaxy. And that's the banter system. We called it the banter system on the floor, but I mean, for those who haven't played the game, and it's not really going to spoil anything, it's just an ingredient, one of the many narrative ingredients that are in the game. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I was always really fascinated by the idea, and the final execution looks really, really good. It really felt good. So I'm just curious, just your thoughts. Like, what is it exactly? What the hell am I talking about for people who don't know? And like, just some of the thought process behind it and the difficulties and the sort of the victories.
Okay. Well, when we talk about the banter system, basically, like you said, when you're playing the game, you play Star-Lord, and Star-Lord is wandering around exploring all these environments, and he's always got the 4 other characters with him. They're always there. They're always present. And because we want to be hanging out with the Guardians, and because the Guardians just never shut up, we had to basically have them bantering all the time. And Star-Lord, being a character, he has to kind of answer back and stuff. So we had to create this system in which the Guardians are always talking. At times you can interject into the conversation and choose the flow of the conversation one way or another. Other times you can be completely ignoring it because they're going off on their own. And then we also incorporate into that banter system the idea that, okay, but they're alive characters. So if you're wandering off the beaten path and you're going somewhere else, they're going to notice and they're going to talk about it. So, we had to basically write all these different in-game dialogues that were going on. And in terms of that, the in-game dialogue, it has to always be like keeping you on track, telling you the story, being real, being just them chit-chatting, carrying the themes of the game, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the player, are moving the character through the game in real time. So you can't, one of the big challenges is, you can't have this like 10-line dialogue that's going on because you only have room for,
That's right.
I mean, well, the minimum amount of room you have if the player is walking is maybe 4 lines, but then if the player stops, the player may, and 4 lines won't cover it. And how do you do this? So they created, smarter minds than mine, created these wonderful interlapping systems that would enable us to write dialogue in ways that we'd have short conversations, and then they could get strung together longer. They could get interjected and all that stuff. And so from a writing task, what it ended up being is people had to write tons and tons and tons.
Oh my God,
and
so much.
Again, we broke it into pathways so that we'd have, here's the main critical path dialogues that have to get into it. Here are a series of reactive things that, because the player might be looking at this, let's tag something for that. And, you know, we'd write those kind of banters. Then we'd also write just conversational banters where they're just basically shooting the breeze with each other. And there are different systems that we're working in the game to call those dialogues. But then it doesn't end there. So we do it, we write it, we record it. Then there's an entire team called we named them the Loco Banter team, locomotion and banter, because this team, which consisted of writers and level designers and scripters and I think maybe even animators or whatever, they went in and they had to put the animations on the characters and tell those characters where they're going to stand, what are they going to do, and put in the facial for the expressions and emotions and stuff to make them feel alive. And part of the process of doing this, of implementing it, you'd have the writer was involved because you'd say, oh, guess what? This dialogue doesn't fit. Okay.
Yeah. The space and level design.
Yeah. The level design doesn't fit and there's no way. So my lead writer, Casper Hartman, was the one largely leading this effort. And he would go in and he would change lines, recorded lines of dialogue. So we weren't re-recording, but he would find a line of dialogue that fit from Star-Lord, and he'd chop up dialogue so they make sense, and just by swapping WAV files. It's editing with what exists. So and just to get it in there and get it as perfect as we possibly can.
What I really love the most about that system is that it's like it's layered on top of the player would already be exploring the space, right? There was exploration was a big part of this game because the worlds you would visit were like characters in them themselves. Like they wanted to just check it out, check every corner. So if the player's doing this, it also is a really great opportunity to, instead of just be hanging out with a bunch of these AI controlled robots, why not actually make those times that the player could be further bonding with his characters? Like you could pick, there's arguments breaking out with the Guardians, and then as Star-Lord, you could decide to side with one of them or the other, and then the other one's all pissed off. And like, and it really feels like you're hanging out with a bunch of people, which is going right back to the very, very beginning on the conceit of everything you wanted to do was this game should feel like you're Star-Lord hanging out with the Guardians of Galaxy, and that really helped galvanize that rather than making all those exploration moments a missed opportunity to do some of that.
Yeah. And it was fun because like we wrote so much, you know, because some of the system was literally just write like write 8 or 10 dialogues that could just play if nothing else plays, and those might randomly get called in through the system. And we'd have people like say, even the game director who played the game over and over and over, he was like, I'm still hearing dialogues I never heard before. Playing the same level. I'm playing the same level and I'm hearing, I never heard that one before. So that was kind of fun.
Awesome.
I think we should probably go to chat. Chat, if you have any questions, I know there's a couple in there. I can start grabbing them, but if you have any, now's a really good time to do it. It's nice to be able to pick Mary's brain while she's here, especially if you've got thoughts about how narrative is done in a game. But before we do that, Mary, I think I have a theory as to what's causing the clicking sound. I want you to try to do something really quickly for me. I believe you have a webcam, and I think that's where the audio is coming from. It's the autofocus on your lens. So if you check there's a little gear, bottom right, a little gear thing. If you go in there, you should be able to go into the audio and make sure that your audio output is set to, I think the headphone jack that I think you're using, because I think you're using an Apple.
So you're talking the gear on my, like you're talking going to my systems?
Yeah, so in this interface. So if you take a look right here in this, at the bottom, very bottom of the screen center, you should see a little gear. You should, at least. You see that?
I don't
next to where your mute button
is.
I
see it. I see it.
Click on that.
Do what?
Yeah, so we're doing real time
go into audio.
Solving. Yeah, go to audio. Yeah, and then the audio input. What's it say there?
Default.
Yeah, click on that and then choose something that would probably be headphone or something like that.
If I get lost, I'm picking the
I promise it'll be fine. You can always go back to default, so you should be good.
Can you still hear me?
Yep, and I fixed the problem. Okay. Yeah, you fixed the problem. I hope. Let's see. Yeah, so now wow. your team can thank me later for this. I'm sure they've all been like, why does Mary's feed keep purring at me? Oh God. Yeah. Because a couple of times I noticed it. I felt like it would stop every time the lens would stop trying to autofocus. And I'm like, it's gotta be that. It has to be. So there you go.
Well done, Mr. George. Well done.
I feel like Sherlock Holmes right now. Okay.
Apologies
so
for the purring, guys.
No, it would come and go.
audience.
It was always, it's not a big deal. It was more, I think I needed to know. I needed to know. It was very important for my brain. Okay. So we have a question here from, David, unless you have something you want to bring up first.
After, it's all good.
After this? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This one, I don't know if it all fits, but it does fit. Good. Rakshan Raj asks, how do you work? For example, like every day we can't give 100% sometimes, we feel lazy or low or some other personal problem. So how do you keep yourself energetic and focused when you're doing the work that you do?
That's a really good question. Part of me would say coffee, although I actually don't drink a lot of coffee. I drink tea.
Amounts of caffeine.
So I drink tea instead. There are days when it's very, very hard to get up, especially working from home. It's kind of like, I'm so tired. I have to get onto the computer and stuff. I think a lot of it is I do draw off of the energy of others. So when I can get with others and start talking with them. But at the same time, there's a bunch that I have to actually be quiet and think and all that stuff. And to be honest, I learned early in my career that there are times when you have to listen to your body. And if it's telling you, I cannot focus on this right now, you have to not focus on it. You have to go read a book. You have to go watch a movie. You have to do something else. But you also have to force yourself to keep showing up at the page. And sometimes by just showing up on the page, as I start working on something, it activates my imagination. And once the imagination gets activated, then I get the power and I get the energy.
Yeah, you just need that first dopamine hit. And then once that just sort of cascades into getting sucked right into it, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, the writing in a game is what inspires a lot of people. Like it inspires so many things. So it's like, who inspires the people who are building the inspiration for everybody else? I guess caffeine, and I guess in a way just the work itself, like you said, you let the project take you in.
Yeah. And I do also, what inspires me a lot is I do suck in so much media. I mean, I watch television, I watch movies all the time, I read books all the time, and I'm very story driven. So I'm always looking for the stories. And then I think all that just gets into the melding pot of ideas. And then I want to make it mine as opposed to someone else's.
I'm curious, Mary, are you still meditating?
Yes. I meditate every morning.
Because I actually started 2.5 years ago, and you're the one that convinced me that I should
no way.
do it.
Fun.
Yeah, I remember that you told me, you should try this Calm application. It works. And I was at a time, I think that we were both stressed out on the project that we're working on. I said, give it a shot, and never look back. Same thing, new morning routine, half an hour. Do you feel that it's one of the many different tools that is helping you to cope with stress, anxiety, everything that goes into big AAA production?
Yes. I mean, I do meditate every morning, just for like 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes, maybe a bit longer. And the reason I keep it up is because I have actually seen the moments in which, because in a creative endeavor, you can get angry when your ideas aren't being accepted, or you can't, when someone isn't. And there have been times when I've been in moments in these very passionate conversations, and I've realized, okay, wait a minute, step back, take a deep breath, deal with this again. And that has helped me a lot. So it definitely does help me to recharge, and it helps me to stay focused at times, and to handle a lot of the stress.
Awesome.
I've been told many times that this would be good for me, but apparently I've chosen the path of darkness and chaos. Chaos reigns in my mind. Okay, we got another question here from Sunny Mathurja. I'm saying that wrong. I suck at names, but I'm going to give this. I give it a shot anyways. Question: where would you get started with narrative design for games / animation based on what you know now? Is there something like? Is there the equivalent of the 12 animation principles for writing for games? So I don't know if you, are you familiar with the 12 animation principles? They're like,
No, not
basically you can
necessarily.
think of them as ingredients that go into making good animation. So
Okay.
like not a formula per se, but just like a checklist of things you should try to always remember when you're making something, when you're animating. So is there something like that for writing?
For me, for writing, obviously the hero's journey is one of the big ones. It's when you're building a plot, then there's a lot to be said about that hero's journey and understanding it and then subverting it too. But it's really important to know, okay, where's the conflict? Where's this? Where's that? For where I start with character, a lot of times I start with character. And when I'm starting with character, I have my little rules for characters. Like when I'm coming up with a character, I start with their personality traits. And I try and find 4 personality traits that both balance and conflict with each other, so that it makes for a well-rounded character. And then when I start doing that, then I start building in the backstory of who this person is and how that happened in order to flesh out a character. And then I just, sometimes it's funny because sometimes, back to the earlier question a little bit, I was thinking, when I get motivated, well, sometimes the way I get motivated is I just lie in bed and I just daydream story. And then I'm just picturing things. And then eventually it reaches a point where it's like, you got to go write this down before you forget it. So I think that's it. I mean, other than any kind of real 12 principles or anything like that, I don't know. I guess it's really more just hero's journey is a big one, character traits, and then understanding the motivations and the needs, the emotions are very important. For games, theme is a very important thing too, because theme can unite the game design, the gameplay with the story, in ways that make sure that you're not telling a story and playing something else.
Right.
So that's a big one.
There's a follow-up question to this, which I think works. What is your recommended reading / watch list for both learning to write for games and fictional stories that you've drawn the most inspiration from? So you brought up the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, of course, was the author of the hero's journey. It's a kind of a deconstruction of classic storytelling techniques that have been used in some very popular films like Star Wars, hero's journey, Lord of the Rings, hero's journey. Usually there's a sort of a bit of a template to the hero's journey that we see echoed and repeated. There are other philosophies, other good books that you would recommend for people to start reading on this topic?
Not necessarily for games, but for writing itself. I
in general,
very early on found, I'm forgetting her last name, but Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Ginsburg, I think was. It was very inspirational in terms of thinking about how to free up your words, how to free up ideas, and how to fill the bucket and all that stuff. But that's really more for just writing, not structure or anything like that. But that was a big inspiration on me very early on. Learning to write for games. I know there's tons of different books that are out there, but I will admit I haven't read them because I've mostly just done it by playing the games, seeing the narrative means that are available in them, and starting to create from that.
I would say personally, one book that I remember that Dean DeBlois had recommended to me, it was the director of How to Train the Dragon, was Save the Cat. It's one that I really did enjoyed. And also to me, the masterclass on masterclass.com of Aaron Sorkin.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
I felt that was
I haven't listened
very, very good. At least for someone like me that is familiar with writing a narrative process, but it's not my profession at all. It was a great overview and insight into what it is required to great plot, great story, great characters. So that would be my 2 recommendations there.
Yeah, I like to say the cat.
Yeah,
it's cool. Sorry,
I don't know that one. I'd love to read that. I think for me, I've learned mostly by doing and sharing my work with others and listening to what they have to say about it. Because a lot of times I find when writers give me their work, they then feel that they have to explain to me everything. And it's like, don't try and explain your work. Just give it to someone and listen to what they tell you they're getting out of it, because you're already biased and stuff. So hearing that, and as the writer of the work, you hear what they're saying and you can reject what they say, but it helps you to understand, oh, I thought it meant this, but you're telling me it meant that. Now how can I fix that to say more clearly what I wanted? So.
Yeah, just for a little perspective on the Save the Cat stories, books, by the way, there's a couple of them. Unfortunately, the author has since passed. And I'm trying to remember his name for some reason. I can't come to me right now. But what they do is they had a philosophy that all the stories that exist today and ones that will exist in future will fit into one of these several categories.
Yes.
I don't really buy 100% into this idea, but I do think it's a very interesting way to start because trying to think about learning how to write, it feels like you're just staring into the abyss. Like, where do you even start with something like that? So I feel like it's good training wheels, especially for people who may not be wanting to be writers, but want to work on a production like film or games where there is going to be a story. I found that these kind of things help allowing the artist to interface with story. They understand the structure a bit better so that when they see writing come to them, they're like, oh, I get, of course, that's so important right now. It's a pivotal scene because that's the moment where this happens. And it just, I find it helps a lot. So I think I would encourage all animators to definitely read some of these kind of books because I think it really helps you connect a little bit better with, the person who's sitting next to you, what they're doing, There is another one that I would recommend to the mix here would be Scott McCloud. Actually is a cartoonist, and he wrote a bunch of books that were themed on understanding comics. And there's some very, very, very golden nuggets in these books. If you show it's, I like it too because it's a very visual storytelling as well. So if people are listening and they want to check that out, that would be another one I would recommend. There is, and then just really quickly, A to the J brought up, I brought up Dan Harmon a little while ago, which is kind of funny, which is, you can see it in chat because you can't click on this link at all, but that there is a great YouTube apparently video of him explaining some of his philosophies. Let me bring it back to this here. So Juroku asks, how do you approach writing for comedy versus drama? Like in Guardians of the Galaxy, the promises for Drax and Nikki. So I guess because you have a lot of both in that game. There's drama and there's definitely comedy. So how do you switch gears and what's your philosophy behind making that work?
Well, it's funny because I always tell the story about when we first knew we were doing Guardians of the Galaxy. I looked at my creative director, JF, and I said, oh my God, you're kidding. You want me to do comedy? Comedy is impossible. I can't do comedy.
Yeah, you're killing me.
You're killing me. And I think but when you play the game, it's very, very funny. And I think the reason we were able to succeed is, number one, I have very funny writers who are very, very good and strong.
Very talented, funny. Yeah.
But the other reason is because we approached the comedy from the characters. We weren't setting out to be we're not trying to wisecrack. These guys aren't characters who are wisecracking. These are characters who, when you understand who that character is, and they are just being insanely true to who they are. And it's the conflict between who they are and who everyone else is. So that when one character says something, they mean it wholeheartedly. They don't mean it as a joke. They just mean it, but it comes out sounding funny, and then the other ones react. So that's
especially Drax, right?
Especially Drax. And that's how we approached the comedy of it. And then for drama, it's basically recognizing, the emotional intensity that you're going for here and trying to make it as real. The promises for Drax and for Nikki, without giving too many spoilers, because I did that earlier and I'm sorry. They're very emotionally intense. And some of that is drawing on my own personal experience to basically understand where those emotions are coming from and how to push them forward and recognizing it. And then other times it's recognizing, one of the scenes I'm most proud of is, and again, this is a scene, I did not write it, but I had a major influence on how the final thing came out, which is the scene with Gamora, which I won't spoil too much, but I'll just say with Gamora, she has a very intense moment when she shares something really, really heavy, and the comedy comes in at the right moment to make it work. Because so it's a scene that kind of does this, we're starting out whoa, okay, this is intense. What's happening here? And then this thing is admitted to, and then her worst fear is that people won't accept her. And then how do they do it? They turn around and they do it through comedy, and that makes it happen. And I remember when we were working on that scene, the writers were writing the scene and they were making it all very serious. And then they were having, the serious reaction to it, to say, the serious way of saying we love you and we understand it. And I was like, no, this is the moment. This is the moment you have to turn it around with a joke, because it's got to do it, and then push that scene further. So sometimes it's a balance, it's a feel.
Yeah.
And it's iteration. It's writing again and again and again.
And trying those ideas when you do the table reads, for instance, and seeing how they play out and getting a feeling of the vibe and tone of that conversation and tweaking it and tuning it and constantly revisiting. It's definitely not it's not a straightforward process writing for anything, I guess, like just because of how often you have to go back and rework. And especially when you're, like you said, the game was not written chronologically. It was the way it was done for logistical reasons, it was broken up into different sections. So that would even create an even more intense sort of need to go back and revisit things, just because, suddenly something happens earlier on in an earlier zone that you didn't do right away that now has huge impacts on what happens later that you already wrote. And now what do you do? So yeah, I can imagine the amount of back and forth. I'm looking for more questions.
I have one. Actually, Mary, you discussed the relationship, the creative relationship that you have with the creative director, Jeff Duga, and you guys have been working together for what, like 15 years at least?
15
now?
years. Eidos is celebrating its 15-year anniversary, and we both started together on that.
Because I remember that recently we've been speaking about, when we built, and it was actually with Steve Chikowski, that, building a team and having trust and how, those creative bonds that you have or make everything easier. So is that something that, do you feel that, okay, he's creative in his own way and he's very narrative driven, and you represent the narrative, so it's kind of this bond that maybe you guys will continue to work for another 15 years?
Working with JF has been really, really great. I think we naturally complement each other. So one of the things that I think he's really good at, he does have a narrative drive to him, so he understands narrative.
Big time.
Which is very, very helpful when you're the narrative person on the team. And he also has one of the things, because I can get lost in all the creative stuff. I can just, you get this, and then he can like drive through the logic sometimes for me, where I'm like, I'm feeling it, and I know this is right, but I can't tell you why it's right. But then he's able to kind of latch onto a logic and make things make more sense. So that's been very, 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 very useful in stuff. So yeah, it's been a really good relationship. A creative partnership has been very, very strong. Like all relationships, the more you're in them, sometimes there's
especially when you go in production.
Really handy.
I mean, when you go in production, I mean, when everything goes well, and everyone is fun around a beer at the end of the day, but there's so many tense moments during production that even with the people that you enjoy the most, there's going to be a lot of this that happens, and I think it's a good thing, because if you always agree with the same person, maybe it's there's not enough creative clash there that can eventually build to get the best idea instead of just whatever first idea is presented.
Yeah, there have to be moments of disagreement in order to make a stronger thing, and then when you see each other, when you're able to finally see the other's point, you can take out the value from it. So yeah.
Brent, I think there was one more question that we.
Yeah, there was one. There was one from Scott. Yeah, I'm going to bring it back up. So it's similar to a question that was already asked, but it's a bit more, rather than the difference between comedy and drama. What is from your perspective? What was it like coming from your foundational sort of years of writing for games in a game like Myst, and then now finding yourself in this sort of interesting action game with like an ensemble cast and having mixtures of the drama and comedy in there, like how do you make the writing for, so I guess the question is, how do you write? How do you do the writing for point and click games? How do you make them engaging? Like back when you were doing it back in the day, compared to what you did here.
Well, back in the day with the point and click games, a lot of that, I would say one of the key differences between Myst and say an action game is that Myst, the storytelling is in the environments. The storytelling is in the world building. So you're creating documents and documents of world building to justify all these different puzzles that you're doing or stuff. And you're allowing the player to discover the story through not entirely through, but a lot of it through the environmental storytelling that they're seeing, and crafting the right things there. And some of it is also a difference in terms of the simple, like, okay, so an action game is a different genre. It's an action game may be something that requires the dialogues to be much tighter, much shorter, much more action than say reading through a book or reading all that stuff. So the first thing is knowing the genre you're working for. And by that, not just the genre in terms of, well, action game, is it a mystery story? A mystery can be thoughtful and slow. Is it an action game? Is it a stealth game? Is it all this stuff? And knowing the kind of genre you're working for, knowing what are the narrative tools that are at your disposal for telling the story. I mentioned the environmental storytelling, but there'd be things like in, let's say, a Clancy game, you have the radio briefers that are telling you the story, and then you'll have dialogues and cutscenes and stuff like that. So understand what all of the vehicles are that are at your disposal, and understand when you're looking at those vehicles, what are their strengths. Like a dialogue, a cutscene is going to enable you to tell emotional bits of story. And yet a briefer is got to be short and tight and get you to your point. So you got to understand that, and then you got to build according to that. But a big, huge part of it as well is just building that depth of lore and background, which is something I love to do. And you might have to do it on both to make sense, but an action game may not require quite as much.
I know that we're getting almost out of time, but I have one. If, let's say, we are in a parallel universe and you can choose any project to work on, it could be a game or a movie or anything else. If it's a game, it can be any kind of game. Which kind of project would you, if you could choose anything, which is obviously not something that usually happen, but yes. Is there a specific, challenge or a specific itch that you'd like to scratch next?
At this point, I'll stick with games because I know them so well. Every kind of storytelling medium has its own requirements. I love books, and maybe someday I will write a book, but I think there's a lot of learning to be done to understand how you actually work out, a novel or stuff. And same with movies. It's like, I think games are closer to screenplays than they are to books, because so that might be something. But yeah, I think for now I'm sticking with the games. And then
what about genre of game?
What I want to do, I'm not sure yet. I honestly don't know what my next challenge. I mean, it's true that I've never really worked in the multiplayer field. So that's sometimes intriguing because it's like, well, that might be something new to try. But I think VR, I don't think we're anywhere with VR yet, but I think VR is something that would be really challenging and fun to
tantalizing
figure out. So,
yeah.
But yeah.
Awesome.
Well, Mary, it's 2:30. We try our best not to overstay our welcome. I wanted to take this quick moment to thank you for taking the time with us, hanging out. This is David and I's little bubble of social activity during the week, and we always appreciate having people in that bubble with us. It's a little bit selfish, but it was really nice catching up with you and picking your brain. And congratulations on the amazing success. The critical acclaim that's been coming in from this game. Could not be more excited for you. So. And please pass that on to the amazing team of writers, because I tell them if anybody's in there in the chat, I miss you. You're all awesome. It was a really, really good time working with all of you. So yeah. So there you go.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun.
Good.
Thank you, Mary. That was great.
Cool.
See you around, Mary, and see you on the next stream, David. Bye.
Bye.
That was fun as usual. This is our main way of catching up with people we haven't seen in a long time. Really talented, very experienced people that have been doing this kind of thing for a while, and by any stretch of imagination could be teaching workshops and master classes on what they do for a living. So Mary is certainly no exception to that category, having come from working in games, like she said, for 20 years, so many different types of games. I'm sure she's got stories. We only could probably touch the very, very tip of the iceberg today on sort of what it was like to work on the mini games that she has. And thank you for being here, chat, to be able to soak that up like the sponges that you are. And Pitar, next time, please stop purring into the microphone. I would really appreciate that. We are coming in very, very quickly on our next weekend. It's weird. I don't know how that happened. I felt like I blinked and it's already on our doorstep. But as most of you know, we do have our 24-hour Ultimate Animation Challenge already ready to rock and roll next weekend. Not this weekend, but the weekend of the 26th February. If you are at all interested in participating, then maybe Scott would be so nice to just drop the links for signing up, because you can still sign up. There's lots of teams piling up. It's kind of a little bit crazy just how many people are actually coming in there already. So we expect a pretty good showing. So if you are so inclined, please do give it a shot. It's a lot of fun. We stream for 24 hours. We have lots of great guests on. We try to keep it interesting and fun the entire time while everyone is, feverishly working away on their animation during that 24-hour period. Another quick thing that I would like to do is a quick shout out to anybody who joins us for the first time today. I noticed a couple people at least rolling in. I actually added a chat bot in here recently, which allows me to be able to see it when it happens. But I was trying to scroll up to find it. Where did it go? Right there. Oh, no, that's not it. Oh, where? Oh my God. I literally just had it and it scrolled up and now I can't find it. I'll find it. I'm finding you. There it is. Thank you. Nicholas Majav, I think, is joining us for the first time today. And if there's others that join for the first time today, then welcome to the community. This is what we do here. We do a lot of streams where we have a lot of very, very interesting people on that most of them end up either working specifically with animation, but often, like today, we bring in people that are peripheral to that, the types of people that you would be working with on a production. I think it's really interesting to be able to kind of get a taste for this because, a lot of you are looking to get your first job, or maybe you want to transition to a different job. So it's always nice to sort of get an idea as to like the other types of people that you might be working with on those jobs. So yeah, that's what we do. We do this quite regularly. We have our Tuesday night streams where we have Q&A. Sometimes David and I just answer questions from the community, either in real time, or you can actually send in your questions via social media, and Scott brings them to the stream, and we try to get through them. We also switch that Tuesday night up with other types of formats that we continue to experiment with, including sometimes some free public reviews of people that have submitted their stuff to be possibly raffled off and reviewed in real time live during a stream. And we also have these types of reoccurring streams, which are the conversation with streams, where we do we usually just bring in a guest and we just kind of hang out casually and enjoy their company and talk a little bit about what drives them, where they came from and why they keep doing what they do. So that's about it. Thanks for being here. Have a great rest of your week. I guess it's Friday, so have a really great weekend, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers, everybody. I might not be gone. One sec. Oh, David was poking me on the side. I thought he might want me to say something in the stream, but it's completely off topic. So I will actually go for real. I'll see you on the next stream. Bye.
Hey.